So we started the other interview out by just asking people how they came to the cadets, and that's kind of how we started. So that might be a good place to start. I think in the prior interview on whatever track that is, I actually talked about I think when I first met you at Angelica's, but
Oh, how did
I
I
don't know
get to
how.
the cadets?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was pretty ugly. That was that was not a good story. We've got way too much dirt between us, but I think Angelica introduced us, and he had it in his mind we'd be a perfect match. We'd be dynamite, and of course we hated each other on sight, and do till this day. Um, he took us to, he had it all set up. We were going to go back to his house, but he took us to Nishi, which is a Japanese restaurant. And, uh, and you, of course, don't eat Japanese food.
Now I do. It took me 45 years.
So I'm going, hey, this is really good. Ooh, boy, this is tasty. And George is kind of moving things around with the fork. So I'm thinking, I can't say anything more clever than I'm saying. I'm trying to be a good conversationalist, not knowing you just hated the food. In the meantime, because I'm creating all this conversation, George is going, who is this flake? So before we ever got to talking about substance, we were not hitting it off. And Angelica was going to make this work if it killed him. I, of course, wanted to work for the Crossmen. So where I'd still be today, I'm sure. Anyway, so that's how we met. And then we went over to Angelica's apartment.
Yep.
Where Don says, tell him what you think of his show. Tell him. And it was this show that was kind of a second-rate 1979 Spirit of Atlanta show. It had Elks Parade. It had, gosh, I don't know what it all had.
Fire Dance.
Fire Dance.
Fire Dance. They're all decent tunes.
Blah, da, 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 blah, 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 blah. What was that one?
Oh, jeez.
Some horrible thing. Anyway.
Al Di Meola.
Yeah.
My first drum solo.
There you go. It was fabulous, George.
Thank you.
It was unbelievable.
I think it was my last drum solo.
And it could have. But it came off the line like gangbusters, and they were able to handle the fast tempo. Became kind of a trademark, and there was a beautiful closer, Pieces of Dreams, and Shorty had this great solo, just gorgeous. So there were some really beautiful things in it, but I don't know. They were trying to run them all. I don't know. So he said, "What would you do with it?" And I said, "Pull it all apart. They has nothing to do with these. These tunes have nothing to do with each other. So why bother making them have anything to do with each other? Give each one a big ending." And we did that, and we called it a compendium of jazz, and people bought that, which was really good.
And you tagged on it, Down and Dirty.
Yeah.
Elks Parade ending.
poor, poor Jimmer was forced to do this, and it was not his way. And we brought Greg on, my brother Greg, to do the Color Garden. His thing is certainly not that. So he was writing things with the.
I called Greg from your apartment. It was like bang bang. We had within a week everybody. And that was like mid-season.
Mid-season.
We were in the break that used to have like a week off or what have you.
Yeah, and we said, and the only thing was you're going to fire some people, and I said, fire them before they get on, so I won't have a bad reputation.
Yeah, this is in '81. I said when in '80 we used to have that break, and I went to Angelica's, my dearest friend, and I said, "What do we do?" Because we didn't make finals, and he goes, "Work on next year." And I went home going crazy, like he knew I would, so we got into finals. The same thing this time. It's like, okay, now what do we do? He's like, "You're coming to dinner." It's like, "Yes, sir." So you just kind of showed up, and then we went home and we did that. But that said, the reason that all came up because that kind of set the stage for everybody else piling in '82.
We were able to say we want to do a certain kind of thing, and then we were able to look for that kind of person that was.
I think you and I then we started to get along, and we got rid of some people. Actually, during that year,
right?
I gave without using people's names. I gave the story. I could still picture sitting on the hill, and we're trying to fix things, and the drill guy goes, "I can't fix that." And I remember Dottie Van Doren. This is like my management lesson 101. Well, I guess we'll get somebody that can. I remember sitting there going,
"Wow, that's rough."
But we did. We just started clearing house and did things ourselves. So at the end of the year, it was like there were maybe half, I don't know, handful of us.
Yeah, but we knew I think we knew where we were headed, and we had some great musical choices. I thought, I remember it being very focused. That after we came off that year, it was like, phew, we got through this one. by adding a lot of pink ribbon to the color guard outfits and brighter flags, and tightened up the drill and gave everything an ending. And they played their horns exceedingly well. They actually played drums okay. And so we got on this other kick, and I can remember still to this day, truly like it was last week, being in the Elmwood Park VFW as they're playing the first time they're struggling through Rocky Point Holiday. And you said, "What are we going to do?"
Oh, I remember that.
And I said, "They're going to fire us. They're just going to fire us. So there's no point worrying because we're going to be fired." But I remember Jimmer calling me and saying, "Have this wind piece called Rocky Point Holiday?" I said, "You're not going to believe this. I do know it and I love it." And that was, we kicked off this kind of American music shtick, and we're going to play. At the time, there was just no way to create a niche for yourself. There was just no way. Every niche had been used up. And so what we did was we elbowed our way in. Phantom was heading, they were in their first year of this terrific production of Spartacus. It was very theatrical. It was ahead of its time in many ways. And the great thing about it was it absolutely had no state of the art in it. They had done their traditional thing, and they had gone great innovations with dancing and jumping up and down and role playing. What they didn't have was anything that said ours is faster than yours, ours is tighter than yours, ours is better. There was no comparison points to every other corps. So we shoved them down the stairs and made them really too serious. And Santa Clara, who wanted to throw hoops and dance with flowers anyway, we kind of said, well, they're really the light classical, and Phantom's the heavy classical. We're in there with a clean American sound, and they bought that one too.
I brought that up. I remember, I think it was here. You spent a lot of time with me telling me how we were going to do this, and I was like, I was a drummer. I didn't really even realize, I don't know, too many corps had themes other than, Blue Devils played jazz. You kind of knew that. These people were serious, but nobody actually created it's Phantom, but not too many. One or two corps.
There were one or two. Every few
like
years, somebody, This was a theme identity. The idea was the identity of the corps was this. And of course, since we looked like all American, and there had been some tradition in the corps of the haircuts and it came and it went, but it was an easy thing to recall and be, remember we had one of the most popular corps in the world down the road with the Bayonne Bridgemen. And they were the hip, we're just never going to be hipper than them. They were hip, they were hot, and so we said, well, we'll play the other side of that coin. We will be the squarest guys you could have. Because we had Crossmen, and they were hip and jazzy. And so,
right.
So as everybody was being hip and jazzy, it was like, there's no chance, even after all those kids in 1980 coming in, that we were going to be the hippest group. So what we had to do was make square hip. And we did okay. So 82 comes out. And people are scratching their heads going, what the heck are these folks doing?
When we talked with Tom, we talked about Mark was so complimentary about how Tom let the drum line move and all that. And I said, if I remember it, the reason he let him move was they were playing so bad. He's like, what the hell?
It was something he could blame it on. It was, we used the hard Zingali drill for every...
if they would have been a very good drum line, I'm sure he would have never let that happen. If they would have been in the running, but I had left them maybe not the best, most trained percussion line when I moved away. But the same thing in 82 when we took on this no drum solo thing, I was in favor of it because we couldn't really perform that well.
We weren't in a line. We didn't see drum corps that way. And even the most musical guys, Fred Sanford out of Santa Clara and that kind of guy, who we loved and thought got the idea of what a drum solo, quote unquote, should be. It still wasn't our lick, and we didn't have those kind of drummers.
Right.
So it made sense for us to give the melody to the drums sometimes, which was kind of unusual at that time, and make them a full part of the composition. When we brought on Zingali in 82, he jumped on that right away. And Tom was willing to let them fly all over because they really could be good marchers, at least. They could be good at something.
Yeah, no.
It turned out that they were a pretty good drum line as it happened. And so it all kind of came together, 82, 83.
I was amazed in '83. I looked at the recaps, how far out we were in drums. I mean, I remember being out, but when you really look at it on a recap, you were like, whoa. And it was points.
We knew we
that,
had to be, yeah. But the standard for what was a good drum line was about to change.
But it was on field. We would win ensemble or be second.
Right,
ensemble,
because our timing was good.
Effect.
Right.
But on the field, we were mincemeat. So yeah, no, it was changing. I mean, I remember, Dave Lorenzi, my dear friend, he judges on ensemble, had us at like a 9-9. This is like at World Open. Did finals that night. Has like an 8-2.
Because he was down on the field.
He said, I can't judge the other side. I'm not allowed to take that into consideration. I go, well, you know what they're doing and how hard it is. And no, I can't. I remember taking Angelica out for a walk, just screaming. You never screamed at Don, but I was like beside myself. Like, how can this guy pretend that's not there? But that was, there were a lot of things in judging in '83, '45 that changed because of us.
Because I think we changed.
We forced the issue.
You had to say, when you looked at the thing, and I always remember Wayne Downey's comment, they saw the Cadets for the first time in '83, and he just said, we can't do that. And I think everybody realized we had invented this weird thing that nobody else seemed to be able to do. And gosh knows, in '84 and '85, we saw a lot of people trying. And they tried running, and they were stepping on each other because they didn't understand basic things like, you can't take a step bigger than the distance between you and the next guy.
I remember we got blamed for, smaller, I don't know what they were called then, A chords or B chords, trying to copy all that, not being. And I remember Passione sitting me down and like chastising me. I'm like, we didn't tell them to do that. They just looked at who won and said, let's do that.
We got a lot of blame. We get a lot of blame to this day, I think, for whatever happens. You go, nobody asked you to copy this. What you need to do in the state of the art is reply to what's going on, not copy what's going on. I don't think anybody that's actually copied gets very far when all is said and done. And in fact, that's what informed our championship philosophy, which was, if we were going to win it, and we did this long before we ever won a thing, if we were going to win the next year, because how could you ever win anyway? The next year you were going to change everything.
Right.
And it was to take the drum corps, all of them, to the next level. In other words, your obligation as a champion was not to win again, but rather to move drum corps while somebody else got the shot to win. And so that's why the Threepeat that we're celebrating with this tape, that's why the Threepeat was so unbelievable at the time, was because we really didn't think we were going to win. It really wasn't set out to do that. We had done what for the time was a very intellectual show in '83. There was Rocky Point, the new improved Rocky Point, one of the last times anybody could repeat a tune. Right. And we knocked that out of the ballpark ourselves. Right. You can never do another tune repeated.
After '84, when you did it, we took out the whole show and then won, and we pretty much, that was it.
That was it.
You couldn't repeat it again.
Although Santa Clara did it in '89, was very successful. But I would say that's probably the last time that's happened.
That's true. Yeah.
But it was Santa Clara. God, whatever that license is, God bless them. But I think that the philosophy was, we will change completely. And we will do another whole thing when you least expect it. But it's all going to be American music. It's all going to be right up your alley. You're going to love it. We're going to go 180. No matter what, we're going to run backwards. The color guard's going to be throwing things and tossing things. You're going to love this thing. But they're going to dance, and the corps is going to move, and that's just the way we do things. And so we did this '83 show with the Rocky Point, and at that point we took chunks out of the Gershwin from the year before and plopped it as endings and hits and so on into Rocky Point. In fact, at Midwest Band and Orchestra, the Sirius Clinic, every winter in Chicago, one of the featured college bands was going to do Rocky Point. And so a lot of people who loved the Cadets version of Rocky Point streamed into this concert. And they get to the end of the Rocky Point, it just goes, click, pluck, click, pluck, la, 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 and everyone went, where's the ending? And of course the ending was all pure Jimmer, Hannum, pushing the issue, and the a cappella chord and the whole shebang. And everybody just figured it was that, and of course it was, Dizzy Jimmer. This is a guy who could write anything, anywhere. I got to jump to 84 for the story, but I come over to the T-Neck house. This is you, Zingali, Susan Urban, who was tour manager, um, and Sylvester, and I'm skipping somebody in there.
Pat Zampetti.
Pat Zampetti. Everybody was living in this house in Teaneck that had a room that had stars in the ceiling, and we're sitting down, and later, I'll tell the story of inventing the show for 84, but I can remember Jimmer. I came over because I would come over the bridge and we'd have meetings, and I can remember Jimmer sitting at an end table on a couch watching wrestling on TV, wrestling on TV. And the TV is turned up high, wrestling is going, Jimmer's on the end of the thing, end of the sofa, and he's leaning over on the little end table there with the lamp. I figure he's taking notes on the wrestling. I have no idea. He's writing, I have a love. And so, and his notation, if you've ever seen Jimmer's notation, it looks like a 5-year-old's note. It doesn't at all resemble what you think you're going to hear. So I'm looking over, there's notation going down on this card table. It's shaky and it's all. And, you know, we go to hear it a week later at camp, and we're crying. And I started, in the middle of crying, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of Jimmer writing this during wrestling, and it never had the same, effect.
I used to write on that little tiny keyboard, not even like you would buy your 11-year-old. Like, he would never really play he would just play a couple notes. You'd hear him locked in his room. You'd just hear a couple notes. He'd just be in there with the door now, and then he'd come out.
He's a mad genius.
Didn't talk to you much. Didn't quite. When he did in '84, when he did the Latin jazz stuff, I didn't even know it was coming until I heard it. I'm like, what's
he begged off. He begged off of that 3 times. He kept saying, "Get Kirshner to write this. I can't do this," and came up with this wonderful Battle of the Bands thing.
Yeah.
We had.
We were doing it straight, pretty much.
Yeah.
That was our plan. We always had that rule that if you're going to change it, it better be better than what our idea was. So golly changed the drill. It's like, be my guest, but better be better than what we had.
I always remember asking Zingali for a hit in '83. I've forgotten what part it was now. And I said, it's got to be a big push. It's got to be a big push. And he said, I've just done a big push. He was screaming and yelling. And he called me and said, I've given you a big push. And I get there, and there's a huge push. The whole thing goes backwards. Everybody goes away from you. It was dynamite. I mean, it was just dynamite. But, and we were inventing stuff then, too. We're trying to, sometimes it was 2 ideas that already existed, but nobody had put them together. That same room, I always called it the ashram room, because I think somebody that had the house before you had some sort of meditation or something.
Group. Yeah.
And so the vibes, I still think we're in this blue ceiling room.
Yep.
Anyway, so we sit down to talk about, we've just done very well with Mr. Bernstein. Now we're going to do only Bernstein. Obviously, we want to change gears, so we're going to do West Side Story. And George is just, boy, you couldn't wait. Mambo, somewhere, we're going to do them. And so, of course, we're going to open with Mambo. And I said, well, no, we're not going to open with Mambo. And everybody was like looking at me like I have just landed from Mars. And if it's not Mambo, why am I not going to do Mambo? I said, well, Anaheim had done it. They were fairly identified with it. Oh, it's too long ago. It's not going to matter. I said, I don't think we'll do a better version, at least not in people's minds. And it's such an obvious opener. Now everybody's going to, Mr. Artsy Sartsy is going to talk. And they said, well, what would you have us do? I said, Maria. And they were like, and of course I had to sing it and do all that stuff that I did in those days. And, but Jimmer got it immediately and realized that in a short amount of time, we could be playing at top volume, having created this gorgeous thing until the soprano voice comes in at the top of the thing and just nails this thing. And it was perfect for the whole kind of balletic thing we were introducing. And it just set up 30 Marias, and the whole thing was just completely different. And it was, there's 2 ways to get somebody's attention, scream or whisper. And so we decided to whisper. And so a drum corps show starting with "The most beautiful sound I ever heard" was completely out of the ballpark. And by the end, they're screaming, and George writes this abstract rose that starts as a bud and blooms and then goes overblown and closes up. Yeah. I just gave
I hope
myself.
to have the Barb Maroney.
Well, Barbara Maroney, I don't know. She's breathing out of her ears or something.
Bought us a championship.
A couple of them. But certainly that year, it was just luscious. And they staged her so that she had her own
The thing
moment.
was, it was like every night. I mean, she rarely, ever. I guess she missed it. One of the notes at finals. And actually, unbeknownst to me, that Don actually figured out with Jim Unrath and Larry Rock, and they cut in.
Yeah, so on the
But, I
TV,
mean,
you
she
get it
probably
on
played
the.
it 40 times, right?
Yeah.
And she had it wasn't even a crack. It was like a half.
A little blow off or whatever. She was a wonderful performer and
Ridiculous.
one of the great
She wasn't
kids.
even trained. I mean, she wasn't a music major or anything like that. At the time, she ended up being a music teacher, but not at the time.
Yeah, she was pretty miraculous.
Just played.
There was a bunch of miraculous kids in that corps. There wasn't, I can't name one that you can name that didn't have a story to tell
Yeah.
and didn't have cadets on the brain.
But where did it go back a year? Did you bring the mask to the party?
Jimmer and I both, here again, from opposite ends of the thing. I had known the Mass and thought it had a lot of good stuff. Jimmer got the score and was like, yeah, this is good stuff, wow. And so there are pieces I knew. It was the same thing with West Side, where I had been involved in the Broadway. There was a 1980 Broadway revival, and I'd been involved, so I knew there was all this dance music that's never on the record. At the time, there were records, LPs. So we had a great time because it was stuff nobody else would touch, and Van Doren could do all of his keep thinking thing. It could have this shape that didn't resemble any other drum corps because the tune had nothing to do with what any other drum corps would play. And it allowed Zingali to do some bizarre staging things that allowed the color guard to be in non-drill shapes. They could come in doing 2 and 3 different things, dancing. I mean, it looks primitive to us now, but at the time, it was a nightmare. I can remember people coming up to Greg and going, "Where's their headgear?" The year before, the Blue Devils had done this kind of very, Shirley Doherty had invented this kind of sleek kind of thing, and that wasn't us either. We were in nun suits from kind of a Skylarks thing. And so we invented this cadets and their ladies look with the prairie skirt and the rose in the hair, and it was the magic for us. By '84, we're not using any weapons at all. It's simply a piece of fabric of some sort, and it changes what people think of as what's possible with color guard. In fact, oddly enough, today we're back to rifles and sabers. And
They never used weapons, Dave? I don't remember. Really?
Shawls.
I remember the shawls. We talked about the
paper lanterns.
That was '83.
Yeah.
The shawls. When the shawls didn't show up at the biggest showdown of the year for us was at Madison.
But you know what? And Greg has nightmares about that to this day. To this day, he has nightmares.
My brother was on tour. We sent him back. He went like 96. Showed up as we're leaving. Everybody was free. We'd never seen any of the. It was I think Santa Clara was there.
Right. It was Santa Clara and Madison.
And we thought, and then Whitewater's the next day, and we thought, if we could win, it would be like a 10th, and we won by a bunch. But we were the most surprised guys on the planet. We went outside like, let's get out of here.
Right, quick. All right, you go that way. I'll go.
Petra, and then those Shaws.
But you know what? And what happened with the Shaws, as it turned out, there were folks saying at the time, well, they're not really dancing. It's all props in their hands to hide. So the girls did the dance without the shawls, nothing to cover it up. And by chance, I've forgotten who was the dance guru then, was at that show and went, no, their hands are spectacular, their arms are barrel-shaped. This is a wonderful dance. And in fact, it helped us when all was said and done. It was a divine providence, I think. We used the shawls again in '84 for what we call the bearded lady, where they held them above their heads. But when she goes, I have love and all and that's all shawls. Mm-hmm. And George makes that connection. So the melodic segment was just a piece of fabric in their hands. Mm-hmm. And he does all these gorgeous connections in '83. Oh my goodness sakes! I mean '84 with this with the shawls, and the trumpets come from. I'm using modern terminology. The sopranos come from the way far and back. da-da-dum, da-dum, and it gets applause for just coming in time from that far back on the field, and suddenly there's this rush of, the girls have been going that way anyway, and they suddenly turn and there's all of these sopranos playing. And then the whole thing comes together for this beautiful thing, and Jimmer shoves the discord in there. It's dynamite. It's just dynamite. I watch it for pleasure. I just watch it for pleasure. The sad thing about '84, outside of, no food, no uniforms, no horns, we were playing.
No buses.
No buses. It was just a nightmare. That caught up a couple years later. But
That's terrible.
we were down in the South. We had to do a Southern tour, and the Spirit of Atlanta was relatively competitive with us, and it was very generous on their parts because they were lending us horns and flags, and our uniforms. I think we had parts of them, but the Shakos were in the truck, and the truck was always 2 days behind us, breaking down at the same rate as the buses were breaking down. We were missing a show, and they'd show up the next day. And the sad thing was to use the Spirit of Atlanta's equipment and beat them. And this was not so pleasant.
You know what that story is? I just told somebody that the other day. Is we were breaking in every night. I was running on no sleep whatsoever, driving trucks and everything. I think we were in Toledo or somewhere in Ohio, and then the next day was a Toledo show, and I was just couldn't go anymore. So I said, we're not going to travel tonight. We're going to stay in the dorms. I kind of created it like this is for the kids, but really it was like I couldn't go anymore. So we're going to stay there and we're going to get up the next morning. Well, I just thought it was a night show because everything was a night show. I got up the next morning, 8, 9 o'clock, got my tour book out, sitting at breakfast, barely alive. And I'm like, oh my God, we're on at 4 o'clock.
Right.
Prelims. I didn't know there was a prelims.
I think it was U.S. Open.
So we shot there. This is going to get me in trouble now. We shot there and we knew we weren't going to make it. We were going to get a huge penalty. So we said, I think you and I are the only ones who knew about it. Because actually Hannah looked at me and goes, what?
Because it broke down.
I said, let's leave the truck. Don't bring it in. Park it outside of town. And we'll go in and say we don't have a truck. And it worked. They didn't penalize us. We borrowed all this equipment.
It not only worked, but it became the basis for the Boston Crusaders' entire lives for the rest of the decade, I think. They went, this is good. We'll have to try that.
Yeah.
Well, they were woolier and wilder days then. I don't think that would happen
we were
today.
talking, before I had called Don Pessioni at one point. We couldn't go. We just couldn't move anymore. We just stopped. We had one bus left and tried everything we could, and we just couldn't go. And I rented buses. Didn't have any money. I just rented them on a signature. We didn't have credit cards. We didn't have money.
Right, I had an American Express card, and we gassed up all the buses on my card one night, and they called me at the gas station while we were gassing up, saying, Mr. Cesario, we have an expenditure at such and such gas. Is this really you? I said, oh yeah. What are you doing? I said, I'm gassing up buses.
And I can imagine we have 2 cars. I get a call like twice a week, because they were on this one card. It's like, you're currently fueling in Toledo and Atlanta at the same time. I'm like, yeah, that's me. So
sign me up.
Yeah, no, it was horrible. And that's why, at the end of the year, I distinctly remember, it's just, we won, but it was like relief, like, thank God it's over.
I think everybody felt that way. It was a bad scene even after we won. The kids did a great job. It was a season of problems all the way around. Everything. Paul Penicharo's dad died, I remember. I can remember we had to turn one rent-a-truck in and another one we had to get, and we were changing kitchens by backing 2 trucks up next to each other, moving stuff from one's in the middle of the night. There's this wonderful couple of Frosts, Walt and Gail Frost, who were the head of the cooking thing, and they were unflappable. And there was just one day where they just went, we cannot do this one more day. It just got to you, and it was in the horrible heat, and it was, and in the meantime, every night, those kids went out and did this impossible show with the Z pull and everything going wrong, and they were dynamite. I can't think of a show that was bad that year. It was a pretty amazing core.
So I looked at that recap, and we came out with like a 78, but like within a week, 3-4 shows. We were like at 88, 89.
Well, it wasn't. They didn't like what we had done. I can remember Bloomfield, which was traditionally the first show of the year.
Yeah.
We're at this Bloomfield Kennedy Stadium in Bloomfield, and Dennis DeLucia, the drum guru of the East, and a very competent musician. And we did the show the first time, and he hated it. I mean, and had no problem telling everybody how much he hated it. We talk about it to this day. He thought we had ruined his West Side Story because the Bayonnes, which he was so famous for, had done a half a show or part of a show with West Side Story. And we didn't have a groove, and we didn't have this, and we didn't have that. We missed the whole point. We converted him by the end of the year, but taking this concertized version of this and having this Battle of the Bands in the middle, doing 2 ballads, and
we didn't have a Tony. There was no Tony.
Yeah, no Tony. What the heck is right? What the heck is wrong with you people?
Kind of had a Maria. A lot of.
Well, we had a lot of. We had 32 Marias and no Tony. And I said, yeah, but we're not going to shoot a guy when he actually gets stabbed in the real. You know.
Right.
So I think I figured it this way. West Side Story is 2.5 hours. The best work of Mr. Sondheim, Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Arthur Lawrence, the director, Jerry Robbins, the choreographer. We weren't in any position to duplicate that in 13 minutes on a football field. All you could do was grab for the emotional high points, some of the parts you hadn't heard. We did Maria right out of the gate, and that had that, gee, I love that song quality to it. So it not only had a great opening segment, but it also gave you a familiarity. So then we could do Rumble and Prologue put together, which your guess is as good as mine as to how Jimmerman that all happened. But we did Rumble and Prologue, Bobby Morrison with these keyboards. We did marching keyboards intentionally so the sound would be have a distance to it, and they would come from the back forward.
I think that was a hard sell. Like, I remember trying to talk to those guys because I think I came up with that one night driving around.
You did.
And I had trouble talking to this guy. We just got rid of that stuff.
Right.
The only reason we did that is we still had the stuff like buried it.
Yeah, we owned it, right?
It's like, yeah, we got those.
We owned it. We traded for all toms.
Yeah, we had a bunch of
Snares had to get rid of their, and we stole, as long as we're getting in trouble, we never worked that out. So when we finally got ready to do the all toms, we had to have something to hold. The snare drums can't bend down with the harness. And so we had to figure out a way to get rid of the snare drum, pick up the tom, and come back. And George had gotten the drill to come back to that spot. Well, really, Mark had gotten the drill to come back to that spot. But we couldn't figure it out. And we were in a school someplace, and they had a room full of broken desks. So we appropriated 3 or 4 of them and took the desktop off. And by chance, the 2 middle toms fit exactly into this metal frame, and the snare would fit underneath it. So we painted them green, and they were forever ours. And they dropped them off and picked them up. Beautiful material, changing of materials and changing of timbres, and really got some different sounds in there. And that was Hannum and Morrison just being so darn inventive. But after Maria, we had the crowd sucked in. So we could, in fact, give you Rumble and Prologue, and they go on for a long while. And you know, today they sound great, but you don't know how weird they were. At the time, that was something that would make the audience's eyes bleed. They were weird stuff for the time, and these rattling things, and you know, and then this thing would start, and you know, and it was like people were like, stop.
Prior to that, we got a standing ovation just for moving backwards. When you think about what happens today, just for going backwards at 200, we didn't try to turn or anything. Just go straight. George just took them straight back. 64 count.
Right.
The place went nuts. And you're like, what happened? We just went fast because nobody really went that fast.
Not at 200.
And we were probably coming from like a 160, so it was like a noticeable.
I think we were coming from like a 120.
Yeah, I just remember
it was a huge.
They just flew.
The sad thing is, and I'm sure somebody's got upstairs of this thing. The TV coverage that year was so bad they missed everything. So when you go back to relive it or revisit it, It's just awful. They're constantly showing some sort of gong in the pit.
Yeah.
I mean, Shelley, we get to watch Shelley lose the head of the gong beater and her go down, pick it up, and put it on. In the meantime, they're doing this magic company front behind, and she's, trying to save the day there. There's another spot where George does this wind-up thing, and everybody pulls through one opening in a circle, and the circle gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. That's not on the tape at all. You can see people flying behind. There was this battle of the bands, and the TV cameras got both of it. They
always missed. They would follow the sound, so they would get there right at the
end of the thing, and then come back over. I think somebody told them to follow the movement. What it was we had stopped everybody to play. The color guard would move behind them, do a little routine. The color guard was in two halves, and
that was in their defense. There was no Tom Blair, and you didn't have a lot of shows where people saw you. So these guys were like
winging it.
There was no Thursday, so they had 2 shots to figure you out. And they were always 8 counts behind.
Yeah, you just
want a show like that. There weren't many people going, and I'm sure the guy was in the booth just pushing buttons,
trying desperately to keep up.
It was unfortunate.
And there's one spot where the toms have a solo, and you're watching the girls with the little miniature Puerto Rican flags flying past, because they've all got to get to side 2 to make a block to pick up, rip their orange skirts off, and April is the gal with the American flag.
Who would have thunk it, right?
Well, when I started at the Cadets, she was 14. They were interviewing Greg the other day on something else about the Cadets, and he said, she never had a bad performance. This was somebody that just, no matter rain, sleet. We had some tough cookies. Patty Peruzzi and Cheryl Philhauer, and I've just lost. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Cheryl, yeah.
And
Debbie Gosdick.
Debbie Gosdick. How can you forget that? Oh, they were not going to. Right, and the city of Garfield, and the wonderful gal from Sea Caucus, and there was just some, and of course, the sergeant was Dr. Cinzio's daughter, Karen Cinzio, a very beautiful, quiet, sedate. Nothing ruffled her feathers, and she was as tough as the tough gals, but she understood what we were doing. And I'll never forget the retreat, because you used to pass by the winners, and I'll never forget that gal from Blue Devils throwing her gloves at Karen, and who's standing in the front of the American flag. And of course they had this little gesture, and they had all these little hand things, and the gloves were just thrown at her, and she had to make a split-second decision to leave them or to pick them up or do whatever. And she gently went down, she picked up the gloves, she handed them back to the girl, said, "Here, you'll need these." And then went right back to this lovely, "Here, you'll need these." So there were some pretty wild stuff. I'm back on 82. I can't forget Marshall University and the first time we beat the Santa Clara Vanguard. And that was it at that time. I mean, first of all, because in so many ways, so many of these guys on the staff liked the Santa Clara Vanguard. I'm not that they're not the first one I call up on favorite corps, but most of the staff was. I can remember going around the room my first day in 82 and doing all those exercises you do, who's your favorite corps and what kind of thing, and it'd be Santa Clara, Santa Clara, Santa Clara, Santa. You get to me, I go Madison, They went, "Oh, this is gonna be trouble." But so Santa Clara was a big deal for us, and Gail was a big deal for us, Gail Roy, the director, because he represented so much of what we wanted the Corps to be able to be, both financially, artistically. He led for years where nobody else went.
They were the class act, no matter. No, not that other people weren't, but they were the ones you looked at.
And they not only were the class act, but they were not going to let you forget they were the class act. They had money, and they were going to show you they had money. The only thing they didn't have was butlers handing the kids horns. In fact, 83, we're in Columbia, South Carolina, at Gamecock Stadium, and we pull in late. Now, you have to understand, we start 83, and George has just put together, I've just lost his last name, the great construction guy that did all.
Lucas.
George Lucas. George Lucas had just put together this amazing truck. He had bolted, oh, this is going to be cool. We've got shelves for everything, and it's going to be great. And on Memorial Day weekend, the trailer overturns, and we've lost the trailer, the truck, and all his work. And so we get another trailer, but there's no time. We didn't have the money for the first trailer.
That's how I learned how to raise money. I had to.
You talked a widow into giving up her husband's trailer.
Well, we had to get something.
We were getting money from widows.
I was coming home from rehearsal at that New York State place. I forget the name of it. With George Mark used to stand up on the, or at least George or Mark or depending, up on that cliff. And then on the way home, I was already home. They called me and told me the
truck's gone. We lost no equipment, luckily.
Right.
So we had movers pads. And the movers pads went around everything because we didn't have cases for most of the horns. Certainly not the big horns. And all of the, and so it all went on. So it literally was an empty trailer. There was no, and we just padded everything. And the members would put these on the truck. And they were, God bless them. I don't know how they did. We didn't really lose stuff. We didn't, for all it went through.
Yeah.
And so we pull up. Santa Clara's already in the lot. And we pull up, and Santa Clara had a truck, fabulous truck. I believe actually it belonged to the Blue Stars at one point, but it had all these doors on the side so that like they had opened the door and it was just the mellophones, and it was polished and it was beautiful, and they would watch the trucks going into town and wow, and our kids are looking out the window, like Santa Clara had landed from space.
Yeah.
And we pull up, and now they're going to pull this ramp to the back of our truck, and the truck has no markings. It's one of these ribbed aluminum trucks, no markings on it at all. The cab had markings because Paul DiLiberto painted the cabs, but the truck had no markings. And we're pulling this stuff out. Well, they open these creaky, rusty doors, and out kids start lining up. And the Santa Clara kids stop in their tracks until there's literally fully a semicircle watching us unload. And they were alternating between wildly amused, I can remember a lot of laughing, and horrified that any corps would do this. And our kids were getting angry because, they're carrying off things like their babies and moving, and they look like a moving company, and it was just awful. And our uniforms were old, and it was just poor Aunt Nellie trying to mend them from the inside. It was just, we were just poverty-stricken.
25 years old, a lot of those jackets.
So what we did was, we just beat the living heck out of them. Yeah. The kids were sewing. They went out and did a show. I have a tape of it. Oh. And the opening toss, which comes from nothing, it just goes, ba-da-dum, and there it is in the air, and there's Peggy. Boom, 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 boom. They are all perfect. And the place goes up for grabs on the opening toss of the show, and that was the end of that story, was all she wrote that night. I actually think that performance might have been better than final.
Yeah, that was, because that was, and then they told us there wasn't going to be a critique. I stood in the back. I was beside myself. I was afraid the kids were going to freak out. I walked them like 3 blocks away. Nothing.
Oh, that was, you mean going back to the Marshall, yeah. At Huntington, when we beat, we're thinking they're going to freak out. I remember you telling the drum majors, you're going to stay at attention. You're going to stay at attention.
Well, we had never really talked about what you do when you win because we never really talked about that yet. We talked about it by the following year. But
well, luckily enough, they had good training that their thing, and part of the tradition that was kept was that they just stood. No matter what happened, they were going to just stand there.
I think it was Mark that said it. He said, all of us had come from programs where we lost so much, we knew what it felt like to have people jumping up and down next to you. So we were all like, let's not do that because it hurt. It hurt to stand there and have the guy next to you. They were just celebrating, but you still had to go, like,
yeah.
So we just never did that, and we got a lot of criticism for that in '83. The Autotrons.
Oh, right.
What happened to they destroy their kids? They can't even feel anymore because they just stood there.
They felt plenty.
Oh.
But we took them that night. We kept going another block, and you were on one side of the car. I was on the other side of the car, and I said, "Is this enough?" No.
we were far. I know we were like in the next town.
And we'd gotten to the point where you could no longer see the stadium or the trucks.
I think if I remember, we're on somebody's
front lawn. It was.
Front lawn somewhere.
We lined up on somebody's front lawn. I thought, oh God, this is going to be ugly.
Yeah.
And we broke, and they were fine.
Yeah.
I think we just exhausted them on this forced march
Then
to
when we
this
did
guy's.
the same thing on the backside, we got back. We had to wait for everybody to leave because we had to push out because we couldn't.
Yeah.
Once we shut stuff off back in those days, you had to push.
It was shut off.
So we just waited. We're like, okay, we're ready to go. I'm like, not yet. We can't. We gotta wait till everybody's gone. So.
And then you won the show, and then you pushed the truck out of the. That was. I don't think they would let that corps exist today. They'd probably step in and.
I always say, if my daughter was in my corps back then, I'd have me arrested because. We were about survival. Right or wrong or indifferent at the time. We were just trying to get to the next day, and it probably took me until later '80s to realize it was okay, to have money, to have. I remember I arrived. This is years later when the bus broke down, and I told the kids we're gonna have to have a rental bus that night. And the kid raises his hand, and goes, "Does it have TVs?" and my whole life flashed in front of me. I went, "TVs," and I stopped for a second. I go, "Oh. Yeah, it does." But back then it was like because we all grew up in those programs.
Right.
If we ate, loved the Crossman to death when I marched here, but we had some days where we didn't eat very much either.
No, Robbie, we used to tease them and Bonfiglio about
2-7. Any of those East Coast corps.
It was a hard scrabble life. That was just all there was to it, and it was a toughening experience. And you know what? For a lot of kids, it was. I think there was a great hardening, which hurt them for a while and then helped them later on. There's guys that come to me that marched in those times, and I talk about them, and they go, I got fired 2 years ago, and I thought this is not as bad.
I kind of hate that one. It's like if I can do that, I can do anything. It's like,
well, it's not what we teach today, but it's not how we teach today. But it's 2 eras removed. Yeah. We're talking about 20 years ago and what went down. I think of Rich Armstrong, who's a band director in Texas these days. And this kid had, if nothing else, he was a great guy and not an easy life. And but gosh, he'd get on that podium and he was a drum major and he was a leader. And we got off on the start of Candide. 85. And I'm going, well, here's the show. Good to the bogunk.
Not even here's the show. It's like that dream you have where you have to go, take it back.
Right. Sorry, folks. We're going to go over time.
I put my head down. I was those days I used to sit and still go upstairs. I just put my head down.
See, I looked up, and Rich was there, and this kid had this wingspan on him. Yeah. I've never seen long. They must have scraped it. He must walk like an ape. They must scrape the ground when he's walking because he's 6'2", 6'3", and the kid is just, and that was going nowhere. He went like this, and the beat was clear as could be, and everybody could see it. And he literally just opened up. I swear on my mother's life, it was like his arms went from the 5 to the 5. And they just pulled them all in. The drums were right on top of it. 1 second later,
I don't know how they released it.
The mellophones were right there. And we were home.
The sad part is I learned that lesson. I don't think I've ever broken it since then. Is that happened at rehearsal, but we were late. It was over. We were almost done, finishing up, and Rich brought him in. They went baboosh, and I'm like, Rich, what are you doing? And he's like, sorry, and he did it again. It was fine. Well, whatever he was doing, whatever people were seeing with pickups and all, the same thing happened at night. And from that point on, my rule always has been, if it happens during rehearsal, go get it. There's something wrong. Because you have a tendency to just go, it was just one of those.
It was a fluke. Well, and it isn't a fluke. You're going to hear it. Right. You're going to hear it again.
And that was the two counts late or early, depending on which side they were on. And somehow, by the end, they just went in, whoosh. And most judges, then you go through the tapes, nothing, not a word.
Well, they all finished, but
I was not the kind gentle director I am today. Then I walked outside. I actually, you can watch me on the tape. We're not even halfway done the last tune, and I just walked down the steps and walked straight out. I'm like, it's over. How can you win? You just
but see, I thought that it didn't matter.
Well, it felt really big, And I walked outside, and the corps got in a circle, and I just went, not tonight. And I walked back in, and that was it. And and
Mr. Charm.
Oh, I know you didn't know what to say. It was like, and they all knew something
Something happened.
They didn't know what.
But they
Yeah,
also
they
had, that was Mike Klesch's arrangement. Imagine the kid starts as a bass drummer.
Yeah.
He becomes the drum major, also an excellent drum major. It's superb. He becomes the drum major. And a year later, he goes on staff, and a year later, he's writing the book. Yeah. And while, he credits Jimmer, and Jimmer helped him and everything, nonetheless, the thing is, the guy wrote the winning book his first time out.
And he wrote Jeremiah.
Yeah.
And I think we did talk about this. I think they told me we turned that over to him like in March. Because we were going to do the first circuit, we were going to do a jazz show. We were going another direction. We had a different arranger. Jimmer and Donnie had left. Donnie's mom passed away. And, it was transition time. So, let's not stay in this classical stuff. Let's try another
something
avenue.
So that you couldn't compare it directly to Jimmer.
And we had an arranger.
Who was a great arranger. And he got cold feet in March.
Tom, do you remember to the moment being at my house, and we lived it out in that place on the lake, and we got in my car, we drove to his house at like 11 at night, banging on the door like, we want music, and he just couldn't get it. It just wasn't going to happen. And I remember learning. I swear I remember learning something, but I remember the Pit did it, but I swear we got somewhere. But Tom's like, no, man. He goes, we were done every percussion ensemble chart we could do.
Right.
And we still were waiting for music.
Waiting for me. So Mike took it on.
Like March, and we turned it over to him. And that was probably the hardest stuff then. And you could arguably put that, other than the fact there was no applause point for 7 minutes, and we didn't care. But you could put that on the field today, and that's as hard as just about anything.
It's probably as hard as anything out there. I mean, if we hadn't done the next two tunes, you'd have been in big trouble. And in fact, in '86, we, now what's become a kind of cult thing, on the waterfront thing, was in that same vein.
Yeah. Well, we won. I think we won because the kids were just, nobody could believe that we were pulling it off. And I'll never forget Angelica. He had been kicked upstairs
booted, yeah.
to that broadcast booth. But he said something to the point of, they make mistakes here, they do this, they do that, but, my God, we really look at, and that was still a day, get in trouble again, but where you got credit for what you did, what you tried to do, and it wasn't perfect.
No, but I think that the answer was, and we always used to say this, that there were some superb cores, and what they tried to do was go to this level. Here, we'd even get judges to agree to this. And now my secret is out.
I remember that.
You go, here, would you agree that here's where they've set their goals? And they go, okay. I said, would you agree that here's where we set our goals? And they go, yes, we would agree to that. And I said, can you see how if I get 80% of the way to my goals, I've beaten them? And they would go, it was like click. Yeah. And it was like, I don't have to be 100% perfect doing what I do. It was the end of that, well, they do what they do better than you do what your thing. And you go, it isn't things. Would you agree that here's what it is? And at that time, that worked. Doesn't work today.
Well, that all led to I don't know what year that was. I can picture myself in the boardroom, the performance of the performer.
It started in '84.
Which was all counteract that whole argument.
Right. It was all in. It was
two
groups that wore blue that shall be nameless, one from Concord and one from Atlanta, and it was all performance of the performer, and they clearly can't perform. And if you can perform, that's what you deserve. And that was '84 that started because and it was ugly. And it was not pretty, but it was the usual tack that any competitor is going to take.
It's an odd thing when you're sitting in a room and they're coming after you. You're like,
but we.
And you're not going to argue that. The performance of performer. Okay, sounds kind of odd.
We called it the redundant of the redundancy, as I call it.
But we didn't think we didn't perform. We had more ticks, if you wanted to count them up, in those days, but. But in terms of the performance, the kids were unbelievable.
Well, Sylvester always claimed that we won, when all was said and done, we won '83, not because we were the most imaginative or the most creative, but because when all was said and done, we were cleaner. And I think '83, we were pretty damn clean. I think '84, there was just that emotional thing. And when you go for the real meaning of ensemble, we had it. And that is how we won that show.
You go through those recaps in those days. It was a generous time, but there were whatever they were out of 10s and 15s, were a boatload of them.
Yeah.
Ensemble, like across the board. I think at one of the championships, '84 maybe or '85.
Yeah, Paul Leteau.
Just every ensemble, percussion, there's separate captions in percussion, brass, marching, bang, bang, bang. You know, it's like, yeah. And in effect, we were either 14-9 or 15.
Right. We were doing well in those, and it was downstairs that we had a tick brain.
We had to convince some, depending on who. Well, even in marching, you know, you got used to judging straight lines and spacings, and here we come. You know, flying. A lot of people didn't know what to do with it.
Well, there was a big problem with that because at that point, the Blue Devils are the standard, you know, Mel Stratton stuff for the Blue Devils and so on, and they're opening up, and we literally had to go in. Singali would always say, "I just write it, you explain it." The sign of a true genius. The trick was I kept saying, decide where your blinders are. How much you can see. Can you see that in that period, in that amount of space? The sampling for the Blue Devils is 8 kids. The sampling for the Cadets is 32 kids.
Right.
So when you see an error in that 32, that's one of 32, not one of 8.
Right.
I said, every time, we're always that tight. We blow open in order to be able to move. George would do that little thing where every other person would step back so that these curves could roll around. That's how, you know, tied up we'd get, and intervals would change and grow. For effect,
I had trouble with that too.
It was like, why can't you stay at an interval? And you go, why would we stay at an interval?
Well, how many times we get criticized or we get ticked because we're so, you know, because these guys were 2s and they were 3s and they just look and go, 4
right.
guys.
And you go, no, those guys are the 3.
Yeah, we have to sit. I would sit there and listen to Jordan, and they'd come out of critiques just wild. You know, it would be the bus rides. We would spend the first hour and a half just screaming at each other
Literally screaming
about whatever just happened. And we're like, what are we going to do? You know, you just hoped as time went on that enough guys would kind of open the door a little bit. And I mean, you can't give him enough credit. I mean, Angelica. Not that I don't think he gave us anything we didn't deserve, but at least you knew he was. There was an attitude that knew was good, and you try new things, and I'll work with you, and we'll try to figure this out. Because he didn't even know what we were going to do until he saw us.
Until he saw it, yeah.
You know, he knew. You know, we lived around the corner. He knew we were doing West Side Story or whatever. But he was as amazed as anybody.
Yeah, well, he thought that was a mistake because he thought it had been done.
Yeah.
So that was one where he said, I'm going to have to disagree with you guys until he saw it, and he saw, oh, is these wacky guys doing. We were just doing our wacky thing to West Side Story it was a piece that had more heart because we were told we were cold.
Right.
And in 1983, in finals, as they hand over the championship, the Santa Clara Vanguard surrounds us and plays their little whistles and stuff like that. It was an ugly scene. And it was, nothing about it was pretty. In fact, he fired the drum major.
Yeah, Gail had already left the stadium. He didn't know anything about it. But, yeah,
and so the drum major got their drum major, not our drum. So it was, we were supposedly the cold corner. Of course, the color guard had intentionally. We had done this because the only way you were going to turn those girls into ballerinas was to do this kind of George Balanchine face. Where there's just nothing. The body's expressive and the face gives nothing off, and which was the role that they were doing. But it was this kind of ice princess thing, you know, no touchy. And for the first year or two, 82 and 83, they actually would go around on the arm. They wouldn't go around unescorted. They were always going around on the arms of one of the cadets.
Right.
And it was just a gag. They all wore, a couple of years, they all wore the same perfume and used the same body powder. It was just one of those things that it was to get that to gel in a different way than what color guards had gelled up until then. So it was, we had some pretty wild stuff going down as teaching tools. By the time we finished with West Side Story, and this one I do remember, and I said, well, what's next? And he said, I don't care so long as we make their eyes bleed. And, and we had talked about Jeremiah, and
I remember, because I denied I'd ever heard it, so I think I told Michael Klesch the other day, I said, I think I just wasn't ready to hear it, because I didn't understand. It was way past me. You know, I was a Barry Manilow fan, you know, but you guys swore up and down you've been playing this for 3-4 years. Because it wasn't like we found it. You're like, well, here's...
Well, remember, we had done a 3-year plan.
Right.
So we had listened to a pot of music at the beginning, we had an idea. And part of that was a teaching plan, part of that was an audience plan. The idea being that we wouldn't abandon the audience once they had bought into it. And there's where we were ahead of our time, with the idea that we would develop our own audience. that in fact the guy with the Legion cap on his head wasn't going to like this. He wasn't going to enjoy it. He wasn't going to have a good time with it. And you know, I mean, the mass is not a kind of mass cult kind of thing. And so we said, what can we do? Well, we'll build our own audience. There's high school kids and college kids. So as DCI changed its tune and went to, let's develop that high school band audience, let's develop those college kids as an audience, we were very comfortable with that because we were already there. That same show we talked about in South Carolina was sponsored by Phi Mu Alpha Sinfonia, the music fraternity. There were kids that were getting off on the kind of music we were doing that had nothing to do with what was else going on. And there were people who were Garfield fans that weren't necessarily liking other drum corps and didn't get it. And of course, the more we built those, the more we built our quote-unquote reputation.
Your argument, it wasn't our responsibility to entertain everyone. It was a responsibility of the corps that night to entertain everyone. But you know, you might like the Colts, I might like the Cadets, you might like the Blue Devils. As long as everyone got a piece, you know, that's what it was about. And I always bought into that. But there's still, even today, I think there's that underlying pressure that you have to appeal to 25,000 people at one time. You know, like, how can you do that?
Nobody can do that. And I think that's one of the reversals from then till today. There's been several. And that's one of them. I think the content of the shows isn't accurately seen. They're just not cognizant of it. So they don't know what's hard and what isn't hard. Now, today. And I think that there was a big emphasis on making what it was important, so that when the performer performed it, you could give the appropriate weight for the reward.
Right.
I still don't know how you reward something if you don't know how hard it is. And
we always used to say that the music had to stand on its own as a piece of music.
Right.
We're guilty of that not being true for whatever years.
Well, fashions change.
But at that point, those years, and you listen to Jeremiah, you wouldn't have to know anything about the drill. You'd just be like, wow, you know, and maybe, you know, to a lesser degree some of the other stuff. And then through '86, even probably up until
way through '87. '87 is
changing. But a lot of that just came from looking for other avenues. Like, where do we go now? Where do we go now? Because you started where everybody's, you know, I mean, later in my life with this, people really started coming in together, and then you look for another direction. So you play the hardest music you could ever find, and that would last for a while. Theme shows. You know, we said when we started with no theme shows in the '90s, everybody had a theme show, and you're like, I got to get out of here.
I got to get out of here. And I think you know, the zigzag T-shirt, the Cadets zigzag. You know, everybody zagged. We zigged, everybody zagged. We zagged, everybody zigged, or whatever. However that went, and then the punchline is zig. You know.
Yeah.
I think that I still believe that everybody can't possibly love the Phantom Regiment. So you try to make them be as appealing as you can, but there's a jazzer out there that's going, when are these people done? Mm-hmm. And while we had some shows, West Side Story just has the unique quality of being able to reach a wider range of people. And we knew that we could not stay there and do Broadway show music, that there wasn't another, you know, people go, why don't you do another West Side Story? And you go, yeah, think if there was one, we wouldn't have already done it. And we did do the Candide in the fall. We did Jeremiah and Candide, and the Garden Grow, just luscious. With the ABBA ending. We were overtime as per usual. And so Mike had to cut out, and he came up with something that sounded a lot to me like it was ABBA. But he'd cut out a good chunk of bars to make that thing work. With oversized shawls. We're using some sort of wacky shawl then. Beautiful, and then the finale, or whatever you want to call it, Glitter and Be Gay, and the finale to the piece. And what was odd was that Mike was having trouble, and we kept saying it has to be an opera buffa ending, and it's got to keep on going and keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. And one day he just woke up and there it was, and it was magical. But the idea was you had to keep going back to Glitter and Be Gay, the original piece, and then how it goes in the overture to make it happen. But the one thing we knew would sell that, as difficult was, Santa Clara had actually played it and had convinced everybody in the world that this was the hardest piece of music ever. Now, it's pretty hard, but it's not the hardest piece of music ever. But they had convinced everybody that this was the hardest piece of music ever. And they had played it standing still. This was still in the day of the concert number. So they had played it standing still. It was the hardest piece. So all we had to do was drill. We were ahead of the game. And George and Mark put together this drill that's just unbelievable. And the Z-pull turns itself backwards. You know the Z-pull's coming, but it keeps flipping. Not yet, not yet. No, 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 not yet, not yet. And finally, there's the mellophone line, and the thing pulls out. And you go, Yahoo! And so more Z-pull than you could care to shake a stick at for those 3 years. But if you can tell me the drill move that's better than that, call me. Everybody thinks, well, they're doing the Z-pull again. A couple years of 1990, I think, where they did it. And
Tim Bartholomew gets credit for that. Everybody always talks about where all my ideas come from, anybody's ideas. We were in a dorm room trying to figure out how to end the show. And we're just sitting there talking, and Shorty goes, and everybody's laughing except for Mark and I. We just look at each other and go,
click. A light goes on.
Everybody was geniuses, and it's like, he was a horn guy, and he just was kidding around. But some of the best stuff we've ever come up with is usually stuff like that, where you're just walking down the street or whatever and come up with things. So yeah, no, I guess the last, before I recap, the one thing I always wondered about, when 83, 84, what was fun, maybe 85, like we were the favorites. I mean, we were the poor, downtrodden,
underdog. Yeah, exactly.
And who could, the East chants. I mean, it was.
Yeah, that East chant lost us prelims in '83. They could hear nothing.
Right. And then '84, they were still on our side, and somewhere starting, when you start three-peating, people are going, all right, enough of you. And I don't know what year it was where I knew things had changed. They're like, all you rich guys, the Cadets and the Blue Devils and Santa Clara. I'm like, what? But we had shifted over the years. We continue to shift to. I don't think we'll ever. I wish we did, but I don't think we'll ever have that kind of money. But we dressed it up. We got uniforms. Finally, '86, I think. So, but I don't know where that shift was, where we then became the bad guys. Where I guess after '87 again.
Well, I think what happened was '86. Everybody was really happy, and there was us trying to do something wacky. Then '87, you come back with the tune you always wanted to play. Yeah. And I never wanted to play.
For you to get out of the way.
So the minute I could get out of the way. And I mean,
it wasn't even a second. As soon as
you're very sweet about crediting me with the beginning and the end, and I.
It was all your end. We met at New Brunswick,
right?
At a little coffee house, and I was like, "How do we end this show?"
Oh, that was easy. But it was something we had planned to do.
Reverse Fantasia, of course. Me, the drummer, like, is that a dessert? It's like, no, you got to, like, oh.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah,
that was the one where I'd said.
I still say that. You weren't there. I still say that. Sorry, Rick. I still say Rick Wygan didn't play that song. I've listened to that tape a million times. I don't think he played it. So, but.
That was just wonderful work, and so it continues, and one of the great things is to look at the core and see a little piece of me there still. Every now and again, there's a gesture or a move or whatever, or they click in, and you go, there it is. That's that, cadet thing that didn't exist before I got there, even though I meant I'd be directly responsible for anything they do today. But you run into them, and they're teaching all over the place. These the kids that were and writing and high school bands and winter guards, and you run into them everywhere. And of course, kids that were 21 are 40 something today.
Yeah.
And the kids that are in the Corps are weren't born. I have no idea what the heck we're talking about. Certainly weren't at the show going east, east, east. So I get a charge out of the fact. It surprises me, if you want to know the truth, given what everybody says about this generation. It surprises me and it thrills me that they see that and they like it and they recognize it for what it is. And I think one of the fun things for members of the Cadets is that you get to go and say, I'm standing on these guys' shoulders, and that's how I've gotten where I am. And the fact that at the cadets, they recognize that the kids in the cadets, and I give you the credit for it, but everybody that's there, they understand that it's based on something. It's not just, oh, well, we decided this year we're going to do this, but rather there's a tradition of doing the wacky, doing the wild, doing the innovative, and being out on the cutting edge. And if they don't like it, they don't like it. Somebody will like it, or somebody will get their videos and go home and go, that was really cool. And it becomes a cult show. The 84 show that we talked about, the West Side Story show, won by 1/10 of a point.
Right. But it wasn't the only time we won by 1/10. I mean, I just tell people, you're we got 8 world championships. 3 of them were by 1/10. Could have went the other way.
Very easily. I
think the closest, the most, whatever, the distance to the second, we were 3/10 once. 92, when I really thought we were going to win. It was one of those where the story was supposed to end with us winning, and it didn't quite happen. But, a 3/10, it's great. It built the tradition, it built the organization.
I think there's a lot of things that we did at that time that became the standard. And I think there's a lot of things that are just good. You got to remember, I wasn't really a drum corps kid. And I wasn't, I was more of a bando kid. And I was older than everybody else. So I'm 33, 34. You guys are 24. 32, 33.
Actually, Angelica, the 3 of us were
9 years apart. Right, yeah. Yeah, 9 years apart. And so Angelica was 9 years older than me. I was 9 years older than you. And so I wasn't a kid. And I had already worked professionally, had a Broadway show, had, things going in Las Vegas. I'd already worked. So a lot of these things were things that I already had kind of developed for my personal, professional life. And were kind of standard things that you did in the theater. I'm not pretending I made them up.
Right.
But tell me what this is in 1 minute is the standard Hollywood pitch. You've got 2 sentences to tell you what the next... So I think that there were things that we brought from the regular world and added them on top of what good drum corps was and reshaped the nature of what drum corps is. I think there's very few corps. There have been some superb corps and corps that could have won or should have won that did not, with their existence, reshape the nature of the activity. And the one thing I'm proudest of is not all the wins, and I'm delighted that we won. I mean, I can't tell you. Thanks for the rings.
I'm sitting here for
a
second place 3.
Exactly. Nobody's saying 3 silvers? Do a DVD. But I think that the fact that the cadets were able to change the very nature of what drum corps is, and that their status in the activity was not based on money, was not based on charm, was not based on influence. It was strictly based on the talent of the kids and the inventiveness of the staff. And that became what you needed. And other corps that had not any right to win were able to come up afterwards and claim some of that stuff for themselves. And I think that's where we're pioneers. And I pride myself in the fact that we lost with the same guts that we won with. And that there are gutsy things that happen even today, coming up next year, that you're going to see and you're going to go, you know what? Only the cadets have the testosterone to do that and make that happen and have the sheer guts to try it out. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And they'll make it happen in another way. And that's what we did.
Thank you.